gosh. I look orange. Anyway, I'll just share my screen. So this is Spark, the moment everything changed. And this is my birding beginning story. So the year is 1977. Saturday Night Live, well, no, Saturday Night Fever came out. And Star Wars came out that same year, and I was 14. The world was covered with smiley faces. You couldn't miss them, and my family was living in Boston. In fact, we were living across the river, across the Charles River, with a view of Cambridge and Boston in Brookline. This is my home on Crown and Shield in Brookline, that gray house. And during my teenage years, I lived in the attic up above. Walking distance from there was Coolidge Corner, and that's where I met Jimmy Carter. I was too young to vote at the time, but I shook his hand proudly and I said, you know, I would vote for you. And he's actually 100 years old today. Happy birthday, Jimmy. The Red Sox, well, Kari Ostremski was playing first base for the Red Sox, and if the rumors are correct, his cousins lived right next door to us on Crown and Shield. He never visited, though, so I sort of doubt the story. Bobby Orr was stealing hearts and minds of the public. And winters were great. We sledded a lot. We made snow angels. They were great until they weren't. And let me see, between 77 and 78, we had huge blizzards that dumped feet of snow in our city overnight. The streets were clogged, couldn't move anywhere. The entire state and eastern seaboard was frozen solid under several feet of snow and ice. Just got worse as it began to thaw and then freeze again at night. The city was paralyzed. Schools were closed. And of course, we had to shovel through everything. Schools were closed for so long that the teachers managed to send homework assignments through the newspaper, which somehow still managed to arrive at our doors. Grocery store shelves were depleted, and when you did manage to get to a store, you were limited to what you could buy. And you couldn't even get to the stores unless you knew how to cross-country ski, or you happened to have a snowmobile, or you wanted to walk. A lot of us made bread. I know I did. Loaf after loaf after loaf. Learned how to bake. And I started to worry because the difficulty we were having as humans trying to find food or make food, I just thought, well, wow, what's going to happen with the birds I see shivering in the leafless tree branches? What are they going to eat? So not knowing any better, I decided to throw out some peanuts and sunflower seeds. This is really all we had. And pretty soon, birds started to arrive. I mean, they were starving. So these birds all kind of looked alike to me. Little minor differences, but I didn't even have binoculars at that time, so I couldn't really get a close look. They just looked like little brown birds, all the same, except some of them weren't quite the same. But I didn't really care that much. I was just happy that they were finding food finally. Looking back, there was quite a lot of variety that came to our yard. Some birds were a little bit prettier than others because they had flashes of color, but most of them really weren't. Even the ones that have distinctive facial patterns barely grabbed my attention as being different. But when the cardinal showed up, I thought, wow, I actually recognize this one. There's not only a baseball team, but the cardinal is on top of on every greeting card or wrapping paper or Christmas ornament. No matter where you live, you're going to find cardinals on a Christmas tree. But when this one showed up, I didn't really know what to make of it. It kind of looked like a cardinal and had the same red bill, but it was completely different. And I thought, well, wow, I don't know what that is. Well, the little book that I'd gotten for 25 cents at a rummage sale didn't help much. They just had one picture, and of course, it was the male. And even when I managed to find a Peterson guide at a rummage sale, it didn't help very much either because the pictures were all faded and many of them were black and white. And even though the female cardinal was staring me at the face on the cover, I didn't even notice it. I didn't, however, learn to appreciate field marks, and I saw how much they can change from one species to another. I started to pay attention to that. And I pored over that Peterson guide, and I realized that the shape of the bird, the structure of the bird, as well as where it's located, can be really informative. I love that. I got the Golden Guide some point after that, and there on that page I saw not only the female northern cardinal, but a juvenile, immature cardinal. But this is a better book. This was showing me more details. So this is my moment of discovery. This is really the beginning of my birding story. I was becoming a birder, and this female cardinal was really the instigator. And I began to wait for the male and the female to show up together. I really loved seeing them. And it began many, many years of reading and collecting books on birds. This is one of my favorite ones, Birds of the World. I saw these birds in here and I thought, oh, I want to see that sometime. Where am I going to have to go to see that Quetzal? So I read other books that didn't have as many pictures, like Voyage of the Beagle, Charles Darwin. And I just loved the story of his travels. He started to put things together for me, adaptation, speciation. These all became pretty wonderful concepts for me, and I was gradually becoming aware of them. I read Origin of Species probably a little earlier than I should have. I think a lot of it escaped me, but I did manage to appreciate how much work and how detailed Darwin's observations were, and how small differences in the shape of the bill can mean a world of difference to a bird's lifestyle or diet. And I wanted to document the birds I was seeing too. So I drew pictures of the Guide to Common Water Birds of Massachusetts. This went on for several pages, all black and white. I Xeroxed a few copies for my friends. And I continued to draw ever since then, sometimes very quick, sometimes a little bit more colorful and with more effort. And even today, I still love to draw these quick field sketches of closely related species that are similar in appearance. I love that. These two ducks sleeping. And then I often like to do more detailed portraits in color with more attention to the composition. So I also decided to set my mind to learning the bird sounds and songs, and I listened to this record series over and over and over again. Later on, one of my teachers from high school saw that I was interested in birds and gave me a checklist. And I then started to keep more accurate records. But if you notice, there are no years on most of these reports because I didn't actually predict that this interest would stay with me as long as it has. Birds change names. I had to cross them out and write them back in. When I put them into eBird, I crossed them out with another color. And I was pretty lazy with my locations, but I know where all these places are. My life list grew and grew at a very slow pace. But after a while, I did manage to check off a bunch of sparrows from the New England area. I found all the others later on, but I had to travel to do that. In 1981, we moved back to California and I bought my first car, which cost me $1. It was as old as I was. And in order to pay for all the gasoline and for college books and tuition and all that, I took a job at the Nature Company on weekends and during the summer. And it was there that I met the famous Roger Tory Peterson. He was touring his recently published Eastern Birds, the fourth edition. And my first question to him when I stood there having him sign my book uh, was, when are you going to do the Western Guide? And he kind of frowned at me like he was in that picture I just showed. And he said, yeah, I'll probably be dead by then. No one's going to buy it anyway. Well, in 1990, he published the Western Birds. I think this was the third edition, meant to go with the Eastern fourth edition. So I like to take a little bit of credit for convincing him that it was a good idea and that there was a market for it, because I bought at least one copy. In 1987, the first edition of the National Geographic Field Guide to Birds came out, and that really changed everything. There was much more detail. The illustrations were more refined. The text was longer and more in depth, and innovation, the map was on the same spread as the image itself. So really cool. And I found myself drawn to the confusing groups, whether they were shorebirds or seabirds or what have you. The warblers are a perfect example. In fall, they all kind of turn green. They lose many of their distinctive colors, and they're left with a ghostly impression of the patterns that they have in the warmer months. And Boston is filled with warblers. So I really held that interest forever. And in the late 90s, I started teaching Palo Alto Adult School because I had to get some of this stuff out there. I had to share what I was learning. And I taught that class for 21 years. This was in addition to my daytime job. And I focused on kind of tough identification challenges, like birds that look alike but are different, birds that are closely related but very different. So flycatchers, fall warblers, gulls, moor gulls, shorebirds, etc. These were all things that I really enjoyed talking about. And I was so happy to find an audience to tell those stories. And I loved it. So when my career came to an end, my first career rather came to an end, and I had the opportunity to rethink what I did with the rest of my life, I decided to return to what I had always been in love with, which is birds and nature and the environment. So I took the job as the executive director at Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, which is now, of course, named Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance. And I've loved it ever since. And I've never regretted never regretted this decision. It was the best thing I've ever done. And I still teach classes, and I love each one. My wife and I have gone many places around the world looking for birds, and we've managed to see some things that I dreamed about since I was a boy, like the hoopoe in Israel, and the Andean condor in Ecuador, and the southern cassowary in Australia. I'll tell you that story at some other point. So I've had a love affair with birds since I was 14. And I don't ever want to forget it. It all began with that female cardinal when I was first concerned with her well-being and the well-being of all the other birds that I saw struggling to find food in the deep snow. And because she showed up and I didn't know what it was, but I was fascinated with the colors and the similarity to something else, it awoke a deep, insatiable curiosity in me. And that's what I do still today. I bird with friends, I bird with students, I bird with Bird Alliance members, I bird with strangers. I love it. I love talking to people about birds and sharing what I know and learning from them what they know. We're always learning. Every time I learn something, I'm excited. We learn these things together, and eBird makes that easier and easier every day. So my question to you is, what was your spark bird, and how did seeing it for the first time change your life?